She took everything in the divorce. The house, the car, the accounts, even the ridiculous mid-century modern armchair she'd always hated but suddenly declared sentimental value for. I watched it all go, box after box, truckload after truckload, until the house felt as hollowed out as I did. The lawyers, with their crisp suits and even crisper pronouncements, had painted a picture of fairness, of equitable distribution. But fairness, I was learning, was a subjective beast, especially when fueled by resentment and a particularly sharp divorce attorney. Sarah had always been good at getting what she wanted. I'd admired that once, called it ambition, strength. Now it just felt like a predatory instinct, honed over years of our marriage, years I now saw with a sickening clarity, stripped of the rosy filter of affection. The judge, a weary-looking man with eyes that suggested he'd seen every shade of human misery, had nodded gravely at each point, each clause, each carefully worded demand from her side. My lawyer, bless his soul, had fought where he could, but the prenup, signed in the naive optimism of our early 20s, was a fortress, impenetrable and unforgiving. It was my fault, of course. I'd been so in love, so sure of forever that the legalities had seemed like a formality, a necessary evil to appease her father, a man who viewed marriage as a business transaction first and a love story a distant second. I'd signed it without reading it properly, trusting Sarah, trusting us. Foolish, utterly, blindingly foolish. Now I was paying the price, a price far steeper than I could have imagined. I stood in the empty living room, the echoes of movers' boots still reverberating in the silence, and surveyed the wreckage of my life. Years of shared memories, of laughter and tears, of building a home, reduced to legal documents and moving boxes. It was a clean sweep. She had taken everything material, everything tangible. But as I stood there, amidst the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun, a different kind of calculation began to form in my mind. She had taken the house, yes, but she hadn't taken the memories made within its walls. She had taken the car, but not the road trips we'd taken, the music we'd sung along to. She had taken the accounts, but not the experiences those accounts had funded. The holidays, the dinners, the small joys we'd shared. And then it struck me. There was something else she hadn't taken. Something far more valuable, far more intimate than any material possession. She hadn't taken our story, our shared history, the narrative of our relationship, the intricate tapestry of moments that had woven us together and then unraveled us. That story, those memories, they were still mine. And in that moment of quiet devastation, a seed of an idea began to sprout. A dark, unexpected seed, nurtured by resentment and a deep, gnawing sense of injustice. I wouldn't fight her for the armchair, or the car, or the house. I wouldn't engage in petty squabbles over furniture or finances. I would take something else. Something she'd never expect. Something far more insidious, far more personal. I would take our story, and I would rewrite it. The first step was subtle, almost imperceptible. It started with casual conversations with mutual friends, with acquaintances who inquired about the divorce with that mixture of morbid curiosity and polite sympathy. At first, I played the victim, the wronged husband, the man left bereft and bewildered. It was easy, it was true, and it garnered the desired response. Nods of sympathy, clucking tongues of disapproval directed at Sarah, offers of support and commiseration. But then, subtly, imperceptibly, the narrative began to shift. I started to introduce small details, seemingly insignificant anecdotes that painted a slightly different picture of our relationship. A picture less idyllic, less harmonious than the one we had collectively presented to the world. A casual mention of Sarah's controlling nature, masked as efficiency. A light-hearted story about her tendency to exaggerate, framed as a quirky personality trait. A gentle observation about her ambition, portrayed as a relentless drive that sometimes overshadowed everything else. Each detail, taken individually, was innocuous, almost complimentary. But woven together, they began to create a different fabric, a different texture to the story of our marriage. Friends started to look at me with a different kind of sympathy, a sympathy tinged with understanding, with a hint of we always suspected there was more to it. Sarah, of course, remained oblivious. She was basking in the glow of her victory, enjoying her newly acquired possessions, her freedom, her life, presumably without me. She was surrounded by her own circle, her own echo chamber of validation. She wouldn't hear the whispers, the subtle shifts in perception, the slow erosion of the narrative she believed was still intact. I made sure of that. My interactions with her were minimal, polite, almost detached. I played the gracious ex-husband, the one who had moved on, who wished her well, who bore no grudges. It was a performance, of course, meticulously crafted, designed to lull her into a false sense of security, to blind her to the subtle campaign I was waging. I started to delve into our past, to revisit memories, to meticulously examine the photographs, the letters, the mementos that remained, the ones she hadn't deemed worthy of taking. I was searching for inconsistencies, for cracks in the facade, for moments that could be reinterpreted, reframed, to fit the new narrative I was constructing. It was like sifting through the debris of a collapsed building, searching for fragments of truth, fragments of vulnerability, fragments that could be weaponized. I found them, of course. Every relationship, even the seemingly perfect ones, has its fault lines, its hidden tensions, its unspoken resentments. Ours was no exception. I started to amplify those fault lines, to exaggerate those tensions, to give voice to those unspoken resentments, but always in a way that seemed subtle, almost accidental, always veiled in a guise of reminiscing, of sharing, of seeking understanding. The goal wasn't to demonize Sarah, not overtly. That would be too obvious, too crude. The goal was far more subtle, far more insidious. The goal was to rewrite her, to reshape her image in the eyes of those who knew us, to subtly alter their perception of her, and by extension, of our entire relationship. It was a slow, painstaking process, like chipping away at a statue, slowly, meticulously, reshaping it into something subtly but undeniably different. And with each conversation, each anecdote, each carefully crafted detail, the statue of Sarah, as perceived by our shared world, began to change. The next phase was bolder, more direct. Having subtly shifted the perceptions of our mutual acquaintances, I started to target Sarah's closer circle, her friends, her family. This was riskier territory, more heavily defended, but also potentially more rewarding. Her friends initially were fiercely loyal, protective. They saw me as the villain, the one who had messed up, the one Sarah had escaped. But loyalty, I knew, could be eroded, especially when confronted with carefully planted seeds of doubt. I started to engage with them individually, in seemingly innocent encounters. Chance meetings at the grocery store, polite conversations at social gatherings, emails expressing concern for Sarah's well-being. Again, the approach was subtle, indirect. No accusations, no direct criticisms of Sarah. Just gentle questions, carefully worded observations, seemingly innocuous anecdotes that subtly undermined their perception of her. Sarah seems different lately, don't you think? More stressed. Remember that time Sarah insisted on redecorating the entire living room just before your visit? She can be so particular, can't she? I just worry about her, you know? She puts so much pressure on herself to be perfect. Each comment was a tiny pinprick, a minute puncture in the armor of their loyalty. Over time, the pinpricks accumulated, creating a slow, insidious leak. They started to see Sarah through a slightly different lens, a lens subtly tinted by my carefully crafted narrative. Her perfectionism became controlling, her ambition became ruthlessness, her confidence became arrogance. The subtle shifts in perception began to manifest in their interactions with Sarah. Slightly less enthusiastic responses to her stories, a hint of hesitation in their agreement with her opinions, a subtle undercurrent of questioning in their conversations. Sarah, attuned to social nuances, would undoubtedly sense the shift, the subtle change in the atmosphere. But she wouldn't be able to pinpoint the source, to identify the subtle manipulation at play. She might attribute it to stress, to her own anxieties, to the general awkwardness of post-divorce dynamics. She wouldn't suspect me, not consciously. I was, after all, the gracious ex-husband, the one who had moved on, the one who wished her well. And that, I realized, was the key to the whole operation. To remain invisible, to operate in the shadows, to subtly manipulate the narrative without ever being directly implicated. Her family was a tougher nut to crack. Her parents, particularly her father, had always been wary of me, had never fully accepted me into their inner circle. They had seen me as an outsider, an interloper, someone who was not quite good enough for their precious Sarah. The divorce, in their eyes, had vindicated their initial reservations. They were firmly on Sarah's side, protective, unwavering in their support. But even family loyalty, I knew, had its limits, its vulnerabilities. And family dynamics, particularly in Sarah's family, were complex, riddled with unspoken tensions and long-buried resentments. I started to exploit those vulnerabilities, to subtly amplify those tensions, to sow seeds of doubt within the family unit itself. It was a delicate dance, a high-stakes game of manipulation, but the potential rewards were immense. To turn her own family against her, to erode the very foundations of her support system, that would be a blow far more devastating than any material loss. The manipulation extended beyond personal relationships. Sarah's professional life, her career, became another arena in my subtle campaign. She was a rising star in her field, ambitious, driven, respected by her colleagues. Her professional reputation was impeccable, carefully cultivated over years of hard work and dedication. I started to subtly chip away at that too. Again, the approach was indirect, almost deniable. Casual conversations with mutual professional contacts, seemingly innocuous inquiries about Sarah's work, carefully planted suggestions of potential vulnerabilities, of possible weaknesses. Sarah's been taking on a lot lately, hasn't she? I hope she's not burning herself out. That project Sarah's leading sounds incredibly demanding. I wonder if she has the resources to pull it off. Sarah's always been so decisive. Sometimes I wonder if she's always open to feedback, to alternative perspectives. These were not accusations, not criticisms, just subtle seeds of doubt, planted in fertile ground. The professional world, I knew, was a competitive landscape, rife with insecurity and ambition. Colleagues, even seemingly supportive ones, were often quick to seize on any perceived weakness, any hint of vulnerability in their rivals. My subtle suggestions, my carefully planted doubts, would find their way into the professional grapevine, amplified and distorted as they traveled through the network. Sarah's colleagues, initially respectful and admiring, might start to view her with a slightly more critical eye, to question her decisions, to scrutinize her performance more closely. The subtle shift in perception, the erosion of confidence, could have a significant impact on her career trajectory. In the professional realm, perception was often reality. A hint of doubt, a whisper of vulnerability could derail even the most promising career. I wasn't aiming to destroy her career, not directly. That would be too obvious, too traceable. The goal was more subtle, more insidious. To create an atmosphere of doubt, of uncertainty, to subtly undermine her professional standing, to make her path to success just a little bit harder, a little bit more fraught with obstacles. It was psychological warfare, waged on multiple fronts, in the personal sphere, in the professional realm, in the subtle currents of social perception. And Sarah, oblivious to the concerted campaign against her, would feel the subtle shifts, the growing unease, the increasing resistance, without being able to identify the source, to understand the nature of the threat. She would attribute it to stress, to post-divorce anxieties, to the inherent challenges of her ambitious life. She wouldn't realize that she was being subtly, systematically rewritten, her narrative being reshaped, her image being subtly tarnished by the very man she had divorced, the man she believed she had left behind. The rewritten narrative started to take hold. The subtle shifts in perception, the carefully planted seeds of doubt, began to blossom into tangible consequences. Sarah noticed it first, of course. A coolness in the interactions with her friends, a slight distance in their demeanor, a subtle undercurrent of questioning in their conversations. Her parents, too, became more critical, more questioning, more demanding. Her father, in particular, started to scrutinize her decisions, to voice his disapproval more openly, to offer unsolicited advice, laced with thinly veiled criticism. At work, she sensed a change in the atmosphere. Colleagues who had once been supportive and collaborative became more competitive, more guarded, more inclined to question her judgment. Projects that had once sailed through smoothly encountered unexpected obstacles, bureaucratic hurdles, and internal resistance. She felt a growing sense of isolation, of being surrounded by subtle hostility, by unspoken doubts, by a pervasive undercurrent of negativity. She couldn't put her finger on it, couldn't identify the source of the shift, but she felt it acutely, viscerally. She started to question herself, to doubt her own judgment, to second-guess her decisions. The confidence that had always been her hallmark began to erode, replaced by a gnawing anxiety, a pervasive sense of unease. She became more defensive, more reactive, more prone to outbursts of frustration and anger. Her attempts to explain herself, to defend her actions, only seemed to fuel the negativity, to confirm the subtly crafted narrative that was now taking hold. Her friends, her family, her colleagues began to see her as increasingly difficult, demanding, unreasonable. The rewritten narrative, the image of Sarah as controlling, ambitious, and emotionally unstable, was solidifying, becoming the accepted version of reality. And I, the architect of this subtle campaign, watched from the shadows, observing the unfolding drama with a mixture of satisfaction and a growing sense of unease. The satisfaction came from the knowledge that my plan was working, that Sarah was experiencing the consequences of my carefully orchestrated manipulation. The unease stemmed from a dawning realization of the darkness of my own actions, the insidious nature of my revenge. I had set out to take something she'd never expect, and I had succeeded. I had taken her narrative, her reputation, her sense of self, and I was slowly, systematically dismantling them. But as I watched her unravel, as I witnessed the pain and confusion in her eyes, a flicker of doubt began to ignite within me. Was this truly what I wanted? Was this revenge worth the cost? The cost to her, yes, but also the cost to myself. The darkness I had unleashed, the manipulation I had employed was starting to consume me too. I was becoming the very thing I had resented in her, the controlling, manipulative force that I had subtly portrayed her to be. The line between victim and perpetrator, between wronged husband and vengeful manipulator, was blurring, becoming increasingly indistinct. The climax arrived unexpectedly during a seemingly innocuous social gathering, a mutual friend's birthday party, a casual affair attended by many of the people whose perceptions I had so carefully manipulated. Sarah was there, of course, radiating a forced cheerfulness, a brittle facade of normalcy. I was there too, playing the gracious ex-husband, mingling, chatting, observing. The atmosphere was tense, subtly charged with the unspoken undercurrents of the rewritten narrative. People were polite to Sarah, but there was a noticeable distance, a coolness in their interactions. She sensed it, of course, the subtle shift in the social dynamics, the unspoken judgments, the veiled criticisms, and she was cracking under the pressure. Later in the evening, after a few too many glasses of wine, Sarah confronted me. Not with anger, not with accusations, but with a raw, vulnerable plea. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice trembling, her eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and confusion. "Everyone's different. They look at me differently. They treat me differently. What have you told them?" I feigned innocence, of course. "Sarah, what are you talking about? I haven't told anyone anything." "Don't lie to me," she hissed, her voice rising slightly, attracting a few curious glances from nearby guests. "I can feel it. You've poisoned them against me. You've turned them against me. Why?" The question hung in the air, raw, accusatory, demanding an answer I wasn't prepared to give. Not directly. Instead, I deflected, played the victim again, twisted the narrative one last time. "Sarah, you're being paranoid. People are just adjusting to the divorce. It's awkward for everyone. You're imagining things." But my denial lacked conviction. My feigned innocence was transparent. Sarah saw through it, saw through me. And in that moment of raw vulnerability, of painful confrontation, the truth finally surfaced. Not the truth I had fabricated, the rewritten narrative I had so carefully constructed, but the deeper truth, the underlying reality of our relationship, of my own motivations, of the darkness I had embraced. "It's revenge, isn't it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible but laced with a chilling certainty. "This is your revenge. You're trying to destroy me. You're trying to take everything from me, just like you think I took everything from you." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. They were true, devastatingly true. And in that moment of stark realization, the carefully constructed facade crumbled. The rewritten narrative dissolved, revealing the ugly truth beneath. I had become the villain of my own story. I had sought revenge, and in doing so, I had destroyed not only Sarah, but also a part of myself. The satisfaction I had initially felt evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of shame, of guilt, of self-loathing. I had taken something from her, something she'd never expect. But in the process, I had lost something far more valuable, my own integrity, my own humanity. The emotional fallout was immediate and devastating. Sarah, finally understanding the extent of my manipulation, the depth of my betrayal, broke down completely. Her forced cheerfulness shattered, replaced by raw grief, by inconsolable sobbing. The carefully constructed facade of normalcy crumbled, revealing the pain and vulnerability beneath. Our confrontation, though initially quiet, escalated quickly, drawing the attention of other guests. Friends, acquaintances, even strangers witnessed the raw, unfiltered emotion, the painful unraveling of our carefully curated public image. The rewritten narrative, the subtle manipulation was exposed, laid bare for all to see. And in that exposure, in that public display of emotional wreckage, the truth finally emerged, undeniable and inescapable. People saw not just Sarah's pain, but also my culpability, my role in her suffering, the subtle shifts in perception, the carefully planted seeds of doubt now turned against me. I became the villain, the manipulator, the vengeful ex-husband, exposed and condemned in the court of public opinion. The social gathering dissolved into awkward silence, into hushed whispers, into averted gazes. Sarah, supported by her friends, retreated, leaving me standing alone amidst the wreckage of my carefully orchestrated revenge. The aftermath was brutal. Friends distanced themselves, acquaintances avoided me, social invitations dwindled. My professional reputation suffered, whispers of my manipulative behavior circulating through the grapevine. The rewritten narrative, intended to destroy Sarah, had backfired, destroying me instead. I had taken something from her, yes, but in the process, I had lost everything. My social standing, my professional credibility, my own sense of self-respect. All were casualties of my vengeful campaign. In the quiet solitude of my now truly empty house, I was forced to confront the consequences of my actions, to grapple with the darkness I had unleashed. The revenge, once so satisfying in its conception, now tasted like ash in my mouth. The victory, if it could even be called that, was hollow, meaningless. I had won the battle perhaps, but I had lost the war. The emotional wounds inflicted on Sarah were deep, undoubtedly, but the wounds I had inflicted on myself were perhaps even more profound. I had become the very thing I had resented, the manipulative, controlling force I had accused her of being. And in that bitter irony, in that devastating self-awareness lay the true tragedy of my revenge. In taking something she'd never expect, I had lost something I never expected to lose, myself. The silence in the empty house was deafening, broken only by the echoes of my own regret, the haunting whispers of my own self-condemnation. The story, our story, was rewritten, yes, but not in the way I had intended. It was rewritten in the indelible ink of shame, of guilt, of irreversible damage.